Let's do this thing. I wonder if I'll ever be able to start this stream without immediately acting like a dork for like 30 seconds while I do the audio testing.
There is no finite game unless the players freely choose to play it. No one can play who is forced to play. It is an invariable principle of all play, finite and infinite, that whoever plays, plays freely. Whoever must play, cannot play. From Finite and Infinite Games.
Can't really turn that up. I wouldn't know how to be honest. Anyway, we're just gonna do a quick wander, and then I'm probably going to talk about. I just finished The Way of Kings last night, and I think that I would love to kind of get some Way of Kings kind of like conversation going. So actually, I'm gonna grab the book ID for Way of Kings really quickly, and then from there I should be able to just wander within Way of Kings as a kind of ode to Way of Kings. This is the wrong database. Tables. Books. Filter. Way of Kings. No, of course not. The Way of Kings. Let's try highlighting this whole thing. Easy clap. Okay, copy cell content. Okay, cool. This isn't going to have all of the highlights because, again, I just finished it last night. So some of the highlights are still in my, they haven't been propagated to the system yet, but we can, I'm probably going to try and stay away from spoilers anyway, because I did highlight a lot of things that I think are spoilers, which is an interesting feature of the commonplace bot, which could definitely be seen as a negative. Or it's like if you just run this locally, you obviously wouldn't care about spoilers because you'd read the book, right? So like anything that you highlight from the book is effectively fair play, fair game. But because this is a Discord channel, it's not necessarily presumed that everybody who comes into the channel will have read the books. And I think it's fine for like nonfiction because usually nonfiction is kind of spoiler proof in a sense because who cares? It's really just a collection of facts. But for fiction, the author does spend a lot of time building up to particular kind of leads. And I know that, Discord has spoilers, so you can do stuff like this, like spoiler. And then that will hide the thing until you click it. So I'll probably do something like that in the database itself and kind of figure out a way to make that work. Okay, wait, just a damn second here. Dang on second. Okay, cool. I can get the book ID back. I was just like thinking like, oh no, I'm gonna have to copy it from the database again. Let me copy it to my clipboard again. Okay, so the questions are, what had changed for Kaladin when he returned to the barrack? What action did Kaladin finally allow someone else to do for him? And what issue if arises if caring? Let's do caring. I think this one's pretty interesting. And let's get one more wander going for the same book. It's like kind of like 6 questions or 9 questions to choose from. We might see if one of these appear again. Where does authority come from? That's a pretty interesting. How does Dalinar feel about the gruesome sight before him, and what does it make him question? And what distracted him during the battle and potentially put his life at risk? Let's do the gruesome one and the authority one. And then that should be pretty good for the day. I'm also working on like a code poetry thing today. So here, let me show you. This actually came from that uh book. I kind of am working on a poem where, let's see, I'll just delete this message. It's no big deal. So I think code poetry is like a pretty unexplored territory of art because the idea is that it still runs, but you can have it say interesting stuff and read like a poem. So it's kind of like a double challenge. So for example, here we see I remapped. I'll just copy that code so you can see. This is in another file. So in mappings.js, I mapped summon to console.log, and then he falls fighting the rest as like booleans, and then these are strings. And then let's see, let's run this to get the output so you can see that. So basically the poem reads like a poem, right? It's summon the hero to the front, let him stick his courage to his chest. If he falls while fighting, continue to summon the rest. And then basically that output is this. Uh, so it's kind of like a multiple layer poem. And this is just a very simple one. I wrote this in like 10 minutes. I don't think the poem's that good or the code is that good, but it's really interesting to imagine that I'll be able to kind of like expand upon this territory by remapping, kind of like for example. So let's say instead of like a for loop or an if statement, I can say, const um, victory, is equal to, if, for example, right? Like there's so many things that you can kind of like relabel and map, and then you can use these as actual kind of things. One thing that I don't know is if I'll be able to use spaces instead of parens, because I would like to be able to like do, for example, instead of like summon the hero, I'd love to be able to do like summon the hero. And I think Python 2 did this and then they moved away from it for Python 3. I don't know if I'll be able to kind of like map this to, space. I don't know how you represent space and underscore maybe. Um, but yeah, if I can figure that out, that would make it even a little bit more appealing because then it's like becomes a little bit more stanza like. And then if I can even do things like, the commas and the backslashes and stuff like that too. It make it really read like a poem. But this is still very new. I'm hoping to kind of like put out one of these like about a week or so, and kind of see where that goes because I think it's a fun concept, and it can really kind of relate to the books that I'm reading. Like for example, this is about the war in Wave Kings. So it's a pretty interesting kind of concept. 1 second. Cool. Cool. Okay, so now let's jump into these quotes and see where we end up by these wanders. Oh yeah, so yeah, again, if there's any spoilers, I mean, sorry, I guess. I don't know. I think that is, a minute possibility that there will be a spoiler or two. But if it is, I apologize. The book is like 900 pages. So like I think that like I highlighted a lot of quotes from this book, but it doesn't feel like I did because the book itself was so long that it was really hard to distinguish between something that I wanted to put into this system versus something that I just would never want to see again. Anyway, so let's do the speaks for these. I really like the fact that I can just do this freely, even though I am going to have to put like a limit on other people using it because I think that when you have even 1 million tokens for your AI speech bot, you can very quickly run up against the limit of that AI speech bot. So the question is, what issue arise if you care too much while you're performing surgery? So like the kind of notion is like, what happens if you care like about somebody dying on the table? So this is that first quote. Let's have the AI speak it because I'm lazy and I don't like to do that part.
You still need to work on those nerves of yours, son, Laren said softly, washing blood from his hands. Hal looked down. It is good to care, Laren said. But caring, like anything else, can be a problem if it interferes with your ability to perform surgery. Caring too much can be a problem. Hal thought back at his father. And what about being so selfless that you never charge for your work? He didn't dare say the words. From The Way of Kings, The Stormlight
So I
Archive,
guess what we could
Book
see
1.
here is that caring comes in a lot of different shapes and fashions, right? Like there's like caring of like the person on the table and then the kind of like the rest of their life after the surgery or the event that's happening. And I think that's pretty interesting, right? Like it's kind of like some people will care enough to charge for something and say like, hey, you owe me money for this kind of thing, or they don't really rate money that highly. I think it's probably a matter of priorities more than anything. It's like you can care for somebody in a lot of different ways, and there's not necessarily one right or wrong way to care about somebody or be cared for, but you can care too much, obviously, right? And Cal, in this particular quote here, felt like he was caring too much about the patients that he couldn't save on the table, which runs through his character throughout the entire book. So let's look at these other two quotes, which are actually from two different books. So this one's from Mind Over Medicine, and this one is from Becoming, which is the Michelle Obama book. So let's listen to these real quick.
When you're facing a health crisis, make sure you find the nurturing care you need. It's not enough to seek out the best surgeon or the most famous university doctor who specializes in your specific illness. Those specialized skills certainly come in handy if you want to optimize your body's chance of cure. You'll also want to ensure that your healthcare providers genuinely care. From Mind Over Medicine.
So
Scientific
again,
proof that you
this is
can
kind
heal
of what we were
yourself.
just saying, where it's like sometimes care is the best medicine for people, where it's like there's a kind of placebo effect, I think, to medicine in general, where people will feel that they kind of just want to be better, right? They want to feel better and they want to think that somebody cares for them, and just knowing that another human cares about what you're going through is sometimes enough. And I do wonder kind of if this is one of the reasons that Chat GPT has been so successful, is that it can kind of emulate a human who cares through text, especially since the younger generations are so um, used to communicating through text. I mean, this is literally twitch.tv. Like I've seen streamers with thousands of viewers, talk to text, which like in any other situation is a completely mentally maligned behavior. Like there's no situation where that's like a normal thing to do, except on a website where you can have text be represent other people and kind of other people's messages to you. But there's no reason that that couldn't be AI as well, and you wouldn't really be able to know the difference. I've actually written bots that have done very similar stuff. So let's listen to this last one.
This may be the fundamental problem with caring a lot about what others think. It can put you on the established path, the might isn't that impressive path and keep you there for a long time. Maybe it stops you from swerving, from ever even considering a swerve, because what you risk losing in terms of other people's high regard can feel too costly. From becoming.
So this is more about caring what others think when it comes to your career. So this is caring too much about saving people's lives. This is caring from the other perspective where it's like we do want to be cared for when we are the ones in crisis. And then this third one is about you know, basically not putting other people's opinions of yourself above your own, which I think is a really interesting kind of concept because especially in the era where there's like follower counts and things like that, it's really easy to kind of assume that somebody's worth is attached to how well they perform on the public kind of like space. And I'm sure that these two will kind of talk about that point. But then it's easy to say the other words where it's like, oh, you should just not care. But humans, we're so status driven as creatures. Like we care very deeply about what other people think about us. And that's not necessarily something that just kind of like can convenience itself away. We're inherently uh, attached to what other people think about us and our own status within society, which is why we seek to kind of like better ourselves. Because like, I think I brought this up last episode, where you can't really better yourself against something that there's no metric to compare yourself to. Like you can't be better or worse than the Pacific Ocean. Like maybe you could be better at the Pacific Ocean at holding water or fish piss, but like you can't there's no direct metric. But like if there's somebody who has more money than you and there's a presumption that, oh, I too could have that money if I had a better job or something like that, then it becomes a source of stress. And it becomes like oh well, why can't I have this? Like what did they do that I can't do? Which is again a very real thing because society's values, I think, are so I don't know, they're just so tied up together that I don't think a lot of people really appreciate how tied up uh, values are between different kind of like things in society. As a matter of fact, I think I'm going to tweet that I'm live. I haven't tried doing that, but I'm going to do that now. What's the easiest way to do this? What's the easiest way to do this? Edit stream info. Um, Add profile picture. Okay, you know what? I'm gonna do it on my computer. It's gonna be easier this way. Twitch.tv/Bramsies. Controls FC. Okay, cool. And then go to Twitter. And then go to my Twitter. Luckily, my Twitter's already become like a cesspit because I don't even like X, to be honest with you. I think it's a dumb website, but I think that oh my god, it won't let me switch to my account. Maybe I can't post. Reload. Switch. Okay, cool. Live for an hour or so doing some commonplace bot wandering. Link. Share. Okay, where were we? Yeah. So I think that like, again, when you put it into like that kind of notion of other people caring about the status that you have, then that's the kind of way I think you have to look at comparison. And that's kind of like why I think why a lot of people, smart people, authors have said that comparison is the thief of joy. So let's listen to these two quotes and see if we're so inspired to continue to delve into this topic.
And if you're the kind of person who always does what you think is right, no matter how crazy others think it is, take heart. The bad news is that you will be wrong more often than the herd followers. The good news is that sticking to your convictions creates a positive externality, letting people make accurate inferences from your behavior. There may come a time when you will save the entire herd from disaster. From algorithms to live by. The computer science
Okay,
of
so the
making
AI bot
decisions.
just became it becomes like British every once in a while or Russian. Like it changes its vocal intonation quite frequently. Anyway, so this is kind of again what we were just saying about this idea that there's well, I didn't say this yet, but there's heuristics in terms of like watching what other humans do and emulating what other humans are doing versus kind of doing your own thing as an individual. And it's not really clear the delineation between those two things always, and usually it's a combination of things because it'll be like, oh, I'm going to do this thing that I think is truly individualistic, but then it turns out that actually you had learned that from watching somebody else do it, 5 years earlier. But what I think that this quote is really getting at is that there's a lot of combinatorics that happen with you making your own decisions. And I think that if you kind of like look at the different combinatorics of like, oh, I'm good at this and I'm good at this and I'm good at this, that will put you in a unique category. And this is also not my idea. This is from, I think, Scott Adams before he went completely fucking batshit insane. So let's listen to this last quote and see what it says too.
This is the trap of prestigious career paths. Instead of thinking about what you want to do with your life, you default to the options most admired by your peers. In describing the power of the inner ring, C.S. Lewis warns that, unless you take measures to prevent it, this desire is going to be one of the chief motives of your life. From the first day on which you enter your profession until the day when you are too old to care, he believed any other kind of life, if you lead it, will be the result of conscious and continuous effort. From The Pathless Path. Imagining a new story for work and life.
So yeah, again, this is again all kind of in the same notion where usually I think when people kind of look back at the end of life, the regrets that they have are generally about not doing the thing that they felt was the right thing to be doing because they were too worried about what other people would think of them for the thing that they wanted to be doing. And I think that, this is obvious for kind of like, oh, I worked too much, right? Like if you really unpack the idea of people saying that I probably should have spent more time with my family and less time working, is that they were just basically trying to impress people who couldn't give a shit about them, right? Like the idea is that you're like working to kind of like create this notion of a better life, but when your version of a better life is only kind of like cross registered against what other people think that your life, how well your life is going, you won't develop your own internal compass about how well your life is kind of like performing. um I guess like this guy knows, for example, what this goes crazy hard. Actually, I love this. Dude, look at this, like the shadow on the back of this guy's head. That's crazy. He's got like a cube head, and like the rainbow is actually like really good here. Wow, I like this a lot. Conformity in the pursuit of an individual's unique life path. And then it just went freaking sicko mode. And then simplest version of a okay, so it chose roosters. What? Dude, this is what I love about these transformations. You never know what you're gonna get out for the art. Like it's just really fun every single time to see what the model just decides to come up with. Like what's up with these roosters? Like usually it just comes up with something like abstract like this. This kind of reminds me of like the Road to El Dorado, like the Aztec kind of like dragon head. Um but yeah, so this is cool because basically we can see that there's a lot of different ways to care. So there's the 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 or maybe there's a lot of inappropriate amounts of care to be given, right? So there's this type of care where it's like you cared too much while you were young about what other people thought about you. There's caring too much about things that are outside of your control, or caring about things like money. And then there's like wanting to be cared for. And then there is, what is this? Caring what other people think. And then there's actually a value to caring less about what other people think. So if we do a thesis for this, this is another feature that I added. This thesis feature basically allows me to use GPT to come up with ideas. And I think that, or shared ideas between quotes, I think that it's useful mainly because I've noticed that like a lot of the times these quotes that come up through semantic search are probabilistic, and you kind of have to like, do the work of kind of being like, what does it have to do with anything? And then like you kind of like see it in your head, your mind's eye. Oh, it didn't work. No. Let's try it one more time. I think that the message is probably too long and it like blew up. Let's give it one more go. And let's hope that it fits in. Yeah, because actually this is a perfect example of what I was saying, right? Because it's probabilistic, you have really no idea if it's going to work every single time. And there's things that you can do to kind of like minimize the chances that things break, or at least kind of like decrease the impacts of things breaking. But especially when it comes to semantic search, like you don't know, for example, that like what issue, this initial question, what issue can arise if caring interferes with somebody's ability to perform surgery. These first two are about health crises and surgeries, and this one is about literally, the quote itself, where the question came from. But it's like interesting because like if I read another book about medicine, this one from Becoming probably won't be in the data set anymore. It won't be in the top three. So it just won't show up. But unless the question is slightly different. So let's listen to what it says about this, what GPT says about it.
Commonplace bot set 1. The idea begins by stating the importance not only of expert medical attention but also of genuine care in achieving optimal health outcomes. This foundational concept suggests that care, when connected with competence, can enhance recovery in health crises, grounding care in an essential role. 2. This argument then incorporates a caution against the allure of prestige and societal pressure in career choices. Drawing from C.S. Lewis's belief of internal motivation playing a major role in life choices, it implies that adhering strictly to widely accepted norms can mask intrinsic values, like genuine care in our healthcare example. 3. Bringing in Liren's quote, it stresses that care, while intrinsically valuable, can become a hindrance when it interferes with professional duties like surgery. It argues that while maintaining our foundational belief about the significance of care, it emphasizes the necessity of balance. Care should complement, not complicate, professional skills. 4. In the final insight, the narrative takes a slight turn, encouraging people to be true to their convictions even amid contrary opinions, just as a balance of care and clinical expertise can run against prevalent perceptions. This links back to the idea of not falling prey to herd following, implying that individual stand, coupled with balance, can lead to positive outcomes, thus providing a nuanced perspective on care and surgery.
So, yeah, I think that it really comes down to balance, right? Like understanding that there's a caring too much and there's a caring too little, and being able to delineate between the two of like, oh, I don't care what anybody thinks about me versus like, I only care what other people think about me. And there's probably a healthy middle ground. There's probably more likelihood that we tend to want to sit on the right side of the map of like kind of like caring too much about what others think as opposed to too little, because there's a lot of, again, what do we see, negative externality, like you're wrong a lot of the time when you're following against the herd. But like if you stick to your convictions, other people will be able to be like, okay, well, this guy's over here doing something like crazy unique and interesting. And I do think that that's a way that I kind of like really try to think about life a lot too, is like I really kind of like think about what it means to just kind of like do what you want for lack of a better term. You're only really here for 80 years, and I think that it's weirdly the selfish, it's more selfish to not really, I think, live out your art, because no one else is going to be able to do that for you, and no one else is going to be able to provide that to society. But that's a different point. Okay, so that one's done. Let's look at Dalinar. So we're gonna jump into war, I imagine. Okay, so let's look at these, get these spoken. Hit the speak button, speak, speak, speak. And then we wait for like 30 seconds. I don't know if these MP3s go away. I like could save them to Cloudflare, but I don't really want to do that, you know? Let's listen to all three of these in order, and then I'll talk about them one by one.
The beast struck, pounding the ground beside the king, knocking him off his feet. His blade vanished, and Elhokar fell face first on the stones. Something changed inside of Dalinar. Reservations vanished. Other concerns became meaningless. His brother's son was in danger. He had failed Gavilar, had lain drunk in his wine, while his brother fought for his life. Dalinar should have been there to defend him. Only two things remained of his beloved brother, two things that Dalinar could protect in a hope to earn some form of redemption. Gavilar's kingdom and Gavilar's son. Elhokar was alone and in danger. Nothing else mattered. From The Way of Kings, The Stormlight Archive, Book 1. It all made Adolin feel sick. Dalinar was the Blackthorn, a genius of the battlefield and a living legend. Together, he and his brother had reunited Alethkar's warring high princes after centuries of strife. He had defeated countless challengers in duels, had won dozens of battles. The entire kingdom looked up to him. And now this. What did you do as a son when the father you loved, the greatest man alive, started to lose his wits? From The Way of Kings, The Stormlight Archive, Book 1. Parshendi corpses flew this way, and that, bones and armor shattered by the blows, orange Parshendi blood spraying across the ground. Adolin moved back to his blade a moment later, kicking away a corpse. The thrill consumed Dalinar, giving him strength, focus, and power. The glory of the battle grew grand. He'd stayed away from this too long. He saw with clarity now. They did need to push harder, assault more plateaus, win the Gemhearts. Dalinar was the Blackthorn. He was a natural force never to be halted. He was death itself. He felt a sudden stab of powerful revulsion, a sickness so strong that it made him gasp. He slipped, partially on a patch of blood, but partially because his knees grew suddenly weak. The corpses before him suddenly seemed a horrifying sight. Eyes burned out like spent coals. Bodies limp and broken, bones shattered where Adolin had punched them. Heads cracked open, blood and brains and entrails spilled around them. Such butchery, such death. The thrill vanished. How could a man enjoy this? From The Way of Kings, The Stormlight Archive, Book 1.
Okay, so obviously this one matches the question the most. The gruesome sight that he saw before him was the battlefield of corpses, specifically of his enemies, and kind of like how that leaves him reeling a little bit, like, oh my God, like what exactly does it mean to be, when your identity is someone, especially who's like kind of like a war hero and a warmonger, to really kind of come to the realization about like the horrors of war. This is kind of like a PTSD moment for him. And I think that, Dalinar's character in Way of Kings has to deal with a lot of, um, his visions basically color his character into trying to figure out what he values and what his values mean in comparison with the reality that he lives in. And I think this kind of ties in to the thing that we were actually just talking about, where it's like caring about what other people think. He cares very deeply about his um, fellow Alethi uh, soldiers and high princes and members of society, but it's them who are really driving the nail in making his life harder. They're acting like children. They care too much about war and kind of glory, and not enough about the health of their nation, which is, one of the reasons that his son actually starts Adolin feeling like he's getting some distance from the father that he loves and so dearly, is because he is seeing his father kind of grapple with this notion of kind of like feeling no longer like the warmonger that he used to be. And when you're in a society that's very patriotic and warmongery, it doesn't really feel good to have your father, who you've expected to be this one type of person, to be turning into another type of person. So this is almost like the gruesome sight that made him question who his father is. And then finally, we get to see again that notion of care through him saving his nephew, the king, Dalinar saving his nephew, the king, where it's kind of like this idea of like, what does it mean to care so deeply about a person that you're going to kind of like throw everything away, where it's like the kind of notion of like, I'm just going to charge into the fire. I don't care what happens to me. I just have to do this. I have to complete this. In Hunter x Hunter, which is my favorite show of all time, Gone Freaks deals with this kind of problem but on the other side, where it's too late for him, right, where he gets told by Neferpito that she or they had already killed Kite, and Gon can't deal with that. Because he is a child who is stubborn and has always kind of found a way to capitulate others to his will, but B, he blames himself for it. He blames himself just like Gulliver did for the death, or Dalinar did for the death of his brother. And because of that, he feels like he needs to seek redemption, and he needs to make a very big drastic change. And I think that, or drastic response. And I think that you can kind of see that in the real world a lot, where it's like people will overreact to something because they feel like they did something so bad that the only penance is to kind of like do something like flogging yourself, or kind of like acting like that um person who's done too much. Let's delve into this. And we talked about this one. I'm going to scroll this too. This one's pretty good. Let's see what we got here. Oh, so we got no more quotes there. I guess we don't have anything. Maybe we'll stick with the war theme for a second. Okay. This is cool to have the skulls next to this one. It's very fitting. Let's hear it out.
Sadius smiled, leaning and speaking softly. You want so badly to snap at me, don't you? Even in the old days, you hated it when someone implied that you were insecure back then. Your displeasure often ended with a head or two rolling across the stones. I killed many who did not deserve death, Dalinar said. A man should not fear losing his head because he took one too many sips of wine, perhaps, Sadius said lightly. But don't you ever want to let it out as you used to? Doesn't it pound on you inside, like someone trapped within a large drum beating, banging, trying to claw free? Yes, Dalinar said. The admission seemed to surprise Sadius. And the thrill, Dalinar, do you still feel the thrill? Men didn't often speak of the thrill, the joy, and lust for battle. It was a private thing. I feel each of the things you mentioned, Sadius, Dalinar said, eyes forward. But I don't always let them out. A man's emotions are what define him, and control is the hallmark of true strength. To lack feeling is to be dead, but to act on every feeling is to be a child. From The Way of Kings, The Stormlight Archive, Book 1.
So this is breaching into stoicism, right? This is like kind of the idea of uh, being able to kind of determine what feelings are worth kind of chasing down and what feelings aren't, when it applies to your goals and kind of like what you want to achieve. We talked about energy last episode, where it's like the human type of energy that basically is like, oh, I desire something, and it's not really physical energy, it's not really kinetic energy, it's a different type of energy. So uh being able to kind of control your emotional state is a skill in and of itself. It requires you to be able to have a grasp on your value structure, and basically be able to say like, oh, like, I understand that my feelings are a part of me, but they're not necessarily what drives my every emotion, because anyone who's driven purely by their emotion becomes a tempest of basically childishness.
Sadius turned to Dalinar, smirking. One son can barely control himself, and the other is incompetent. This is your legacy, old friend. I am proud of them both, Sadius, whatever you think. The firebrand, I can understand, Sadius said. You were once impetuous, just like him, but the other one, you saw how he ran out onto the field today. He even forgot to draw his sword or bow. He's useless. Renarin flushed, looking down. Adeline snapped his head up. He thrust his hand to the side again, stepping forward toward Sadius. Adeline, Dalinar said. I will handle this. Adeline looked at him, blue eyes alight with rage, but he did not summon his blade. Dalinar turned his attention to Sadeas, speaking very softly, very pointedly. Sadeas, surely I did not just hear you openly, before the king, call my son useless. Surely you would not say that. As such an insult would demand that I summon my blade and seek your blood, shatter the vengeance pact, cause the king's two greatest allies to kill one another. Surely you would not have been that foolish. Surely I misheard. Everything grew still. Sadeas hesitated. He didn't back down. He met Dalinar's gaze. But he did hesitate. Perhaps, Sadeas said slowly, you did hear the wrong words. I would not insult your son. That would not have been wise of me. From The Way of Kings, The Stormlight Archive, Book 1.
So again, this is managing emotion. The rule of the day is managing emotion and doing what you need to do when you are under stress and under siege. I wonder, let's do a thesis of the two that we've highlighted, and then let's also do which one? Let's do a drawing of this beast struck and the Parshendi corpses one. I wonder if it's going to yell at me. These models don't really like to do anything that's like bloody or war torn, warmongering. Yeah, see, and that duality of war, power and glory with the horrifying death and destruction. It's kind of like this black hole. And this one actually I could see. This one would be in a museum. Like this one for sure would be at the Guggenheim. Just like straight chilling. Let's hear what the bot says about the thesis for these pieces.
Commonplace bot said, both quotes depict Dalinar's struggle with the balance of emotion and control. On one end, he admits to Sadeas that he feels a strong impulse to give in to his raw emotions, like the thrill of battle and anger seen in his past. Yet, he maintains that control is what truly defines strength in a man, implying that he is committing to a calmer and more measured response to his impulses. This commitment is tested when faced with Elhakar's imminent danger, where his emotions take precedence, pushing all other concerns into irrelevance. This internal conflict causes Dalinar to question the dichotomy between raw emotion and self-control. His admission to Sadeas shows him wrestling openly with this tug-of-war within himself, exploring the legitimacy of his destructive impulses. Seeing Elhakar in danger brings into focus Dalinar's fundamental values, family and loyalty. This triggers emotions so potent that they drown out all other considerations, making him question whether it's always necessary to tamp down these strong emotions for the sake of control. This establishes that while control is a hallmark of strength, there exist situations where allowing emotion to take over is not just justified, but necessary. Through this shared theme, we see that Dalinar's feelings and responses are guided by a complex, layered dynamic of emotions, control, legacy, and loyalty. His emotions are not something he suppresses entirely, but something he strives to control selectively for the greater good. Despite the gruesome sights he faces, Dalinar's stoic exterior belies a tumult of emotions, always questioning where he should draw the line between controlled restraint and authentic emotional response.
So yeah, again, I think as a leader, this kind of like goes again to this idea of caring too little versus caring too much, where if he's just going to run in, nothing else matters, throw his life away to save, the king, his nephew, then he's kind of being completely taken over by emotion, but he's doing something that he probably still would have, that's in line with his values. Versus here, his emotions aren't in line with his values, right? He's kind of like overwhelmed by the disgust of battle and just kind of like it, terrified at like the kind of carnage that he's causing to his combatants, his foes that are kind of giving him this PTSD. And even though his emotional state, especially in this world, where they talk about this idea of the thrill of like kind of like the kind of euphoria battle state, Achilles kind of kill streak mode. He can't help but feel like this is terrible, and especially when he would be in his kind of like more stoic moments of peace, he would realize that this isn't something that he wants to promote. You know what I mean? This isn't something that this type of behavior isn't in line with his self. which causes him again to have these conflicts that we talked about with Adeline too. So these are pretty interesting concepts from Dalinar. Let's do where does authority come from, and then we'll probably call it there because it's already been an hour and I need to eat and go to bed. So let's do the speak authority, and let's see where we end up on these three. I'm just going to let them play again, all three.
Thus, how do we know is transformed into by what authority do we claim? The latter question is a chimera that may well have wasted more philosophers' time and effort than any other idea. It converts the quest for truth into a quest for certainty, a feeling, or for endorsement, a social status. This misconception is called justificationism. From the beginning of infinity. Explanations that transform the world. The issue of consent is key. This is the source of the legitimacy of all authority, and of the rights one retains against that authority. We may allow ourselves to wonder, when does this all-important act of consent happen? I was born into a society that was already up and running, and isn't this the case for almost all of us? Maybe I give my consent to the regime tacitly, for example by walking on the public roads. But I don't have much choice in this, do I? From the world beyond your head. On becoming an individual in an age of distraction. You don't have authority, Gezkal. You're not some squad leader on the field, you're a storming bridgeman, you hear me, you can't have authority without a rank. Kaladin left the alleyway behind. He's wrong. Syl walked around to hang in front of his face, hovering there while he moved. She cocked her head at him. Authority doesn't come from a rank, Kaladin said, fingering the spheres in his pocket. Where does it come from? From the men who give it to you. That's the only way to get it. From The Way of Kings, The Stormlight Archive, Book 1.
Okay, so let's talk about these concepts because they're pretty interesting. Basically, what we are looking at here is that authority is this kind of notion of says who instead of is what. So, for this first quote here from the beginning of Infinity, David Deutsch is basically claiming that people are more concerned about what their peers will think than, again, kind of going back to the care thing again, than the thing that they're actually trying to do. It's like the measure becomes the thing that is managed, right? And when you care too deeply about uh, uh, certainty, I guess here, right, which is again like this idea of kind of like a title that you get from being a leader, then that title becomes something that the leader becomes more interested in keeping than the actual thing, which is why you see people fudge in like academia papers all the time. Is basically because they don't want to look bad in front of their peers. They don't want to look like they don't know what they're talking about, which would be, kind of like detrimental to their career and the way that they view themselves, which is, I mean, fair. Like, we all really kind of like do rate our careers against each other. And that's kind of in a part of the game. But like, I think that, maybe it's like an 80-20 thing where you should probably spend most of your career intrinsically doing what you're doing and searching for truth and just trying to get really good at what you do. And then spend 20% checking against the rest of the world and saying like, okay, is this like, does anyone care? Like, where exactly am I trying to do here? Am I succeeding in my goal? The second quote is about like authority from the idea of kind of like, when did we choose authority, right? And I think that this kind of like ties into this third one here, where Gaz is basically yelling at Kaladin, the main character, that like he's like, you don't have authority because you are this title, you are a slave, you're worse than a slave. Basically, we just send you out to die, and a slave can't have authority. Like those two things don't go hand in hand. This is kind of like what happened in the antebellum South, when right after the Civil War, black people were freed in the South, and a lot of poor whites didn't know how to deal with that because they had spent so much time establishing their hierarchy in their head that like they were higher, quote unquote, ranked than black people, even though they were poor compared to the rich white people. So it's interesting to kind of like tacitly say like, oh, or intentionally say, I don't want to participate in this regime anymore. So let's see this. Okay, so this is kind of like what happens when the men chose him. Um, and then we have two art prompts to look at. And then we'll probably call it there.
Scar folded his arms and leaned against the mossy wall. This is stealing, you know. Yes, Kaladin said, watching Rock. And I don't feel the least bit bad about it, do you? Not at all, Scar said, grinning. I figure once someone is trying to get you killed, all expectations of your loyalty are tossed to the storm. But if someone were to go to gas... The other bridgeman suddenly grew nervous, and more than a few eyes darted toward Shen, though Kaladin could see that Scar wasn't thinking of the Parshman. If one of the bridgemen were to betray the rest of them, he might earn himself a reward. Maybe we're supposed to watch, Dre said. You know, make sure nobody sneaks off to talk to Gaz. We'll do no such thing, Kaladin said. What are we going to do? Lock ourselves in the barrack, so suspicious of each other that we never get anything done? He shook his head. No, this is just one more danger. It's a real one, but we can't waste energy spying on each other, so we keep on going. Scar didn't look convinced. We're Bridge 4, Kaladin said firmly. We face death together, we have to trust each other. You can't run into battle wondering if your comrades are going to switch sides suddenly. He met the eyes of each man in turn. I trust you, all of you, we'll make it through this, and we'll do it together. From The Way of Kings, The Stormlight Archive, Book 1. Kaladin walked back to Bridge 4's small barrack, pulling open the thick wooden door. The men huddled inside, just as he'd left them. But something had changed. Had they always looked that pathetic? Yes. They had. Kaladin was the one who had changed, not they. He felt a strange dislocation, as if he'd allowed himself to forget, if only in part, the last 9 months. He reached back across time, studying the man he had been. The man who'd still fought, and fought well. He couldn't be that man again. He couldn't erase the scars, but he could learn from that man, as a new squad leader learned from the victorious generals of the past. Kaladin Stormblist was dead, but Kaladin Bridgman was of the same blood. A descendant with potential. From The Way of Kings, The Stormlight Archive, Book 1.
Okay, so what we're seeing here again is kind of like this idea that leadership isn't really, it's kind of a motive of what the rest of the group needs as opposed to and what you can provide than the kind of like standard traits that you might see in a leader through gentry and kind of like born into power. So I think that what Kaladin does here is that he basically becomes a new person, and that new person allows him to see what the other people need and then become the leader that can take over and help those people from what they need. And then basically, this is kind of like this idea of, again, like they're like, oh well, you can develop trust for a certain leader or like a one to end relationship, but that doesn't mean that you necessarily trust everybody else, which is an interesting thing when it comes to like democracy, where it's like, okay, like the Republican Party trusts Donald Trump when he was their president, and the Democrat Party broadly trusts Joe Biden when he's president, but that doesn't mean that they trust all the other people in the government, right? So there's like a pretty interesting kind of comparison, especially when it comes to this kind of like not really having a choice in consent. So I like this quest for certainty, even though it doesn't really fit authority, getting chosen. I like what else? Um, the trust and the leader one. I'm actually interested to see what GPT says, if it says anything smart at all. It probably won't. I have it in the back end, like mixing up the quotes order. Maybe that was a good idea. Maybe it was a bad idea. It feels like it oscillates sometimes. Like sometimes it comes up with, I think, different responses that I really appreciate, but sometimes it really deviates from the prompt that I gave it because it's very focused on just listing all the quotes and basically rehashing them as summaries. So this is cool art. Uh, he's kind of like standing in the alleyway. He kind of looks like a 1980s, I don't know, this looks like a David Bowie you know, thing. I don't know what it has to do necessarily with authority though. It says an expressionistic a man walking in an alleyway, his silhouette, stark contrast to the architectural shadows, disembodied voices challenging his authority, while a small ethereal entity symbolic of his inner thoughts. Let the military symbolism of authority and rank. So you can kind of see on the left here, there's like a fucking ghost. That's kind of creepy, but it's cool. It's cool. Um, and in the back, you can kind of see like it looks like people walking around. Um, so let's listen to what it says here.
Commonplace Bot said 1. Authority emerges from an individual's personal evolution and the lessons learned from past experiences. As seen in the first quote, Kaladin's authority is rooted in his personal transformation and the wisdom acquired from his past experiences. This becomes the foundation of his leadership. 2. Constructed upon our initial point, authority necessitates trust and unity amongst group members. In the second quote, Kaladin emphasizes that true authority relies on the trust and unity of Bridge 4. He suggests that genuine authority isn't possible if the group members don't trust each other or their leader. 3. Building upon points 1 and 2, the idea of authority is not about achieving a particular rank or obtaining societal approval. As seen in the third and fourth quotes, authority can't be bestowed upon an individual simply by rank or endorsement, but instead, requires the respect and trust of those you led, hinging on the personal transformation and learned wisdom. Point 1. And the cultivation of trust and unity within the group. Point 2. This narrative concludes that authority's roots are profoundly personal and interpersonal, rather than merely institutional or traditional.
Yeah. So again, it's kind of like, and I think this actually really, hearing this last point about um, authorities' roots being personal and interpersonal rather than institutional is actually a failing of the scientific kind of like method in academia, where it's like people are so concerned about losing their job because they need to be certain that they're still the best physicist in 50 miles that they will basically flub their study results to maintain the endorsement that they need to keep their job. They basically want to justify their position more than they actually want to prove the thing that they're seeking to prove. Which is, again, I think one of the problems with just ranking in general, like this idea that you can be number one. I think I thought a lot about it when like TikTok first came out and I saw a video with like 3 million likes and I'm like, this fucking means nothing anymore. Like these numbers on the internet are just stupid. Like really, there's just a lot of arbitrage that you can do, like by using services like YouTube and Twitch to host your gigabyte videos for free, basically, where a lot of people won't do it or they give up because they like don't have a certain number of subscribers that they're hitting. And I think that makes sense if you're just doing it and you're not capturing the output in a way that you can kind of leverage it for like even slight business proposition. But like to be able to understand that like, oh yeah, like duh, like I can just use this service. Like I don't have to be popular on this service to use the free value of it as opposed to just consuming it. And I think that this also applies to the people that we read, especially when it comes to the internet, because we are in a moment where people will talk about other people that they think that other people know, like the Joe Rogans and Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce and whoever's popular at the time. And you know, popularity comes and goes. Popularity lasts only as long as everybody else knows about you. So it's less about like what everybody else says about you and what you say about yourself, which actually goes back to our initial thing about care, right? So this is kind of cool. We have like a cube falling. What is this? Truth seeking from certainty, the essential elements of justificationism. Interesting. Interesting. Well, I think that's about it, folks. That's the stream for today. We covered three things. So we covered, you know, caring too much and caring too little, especially when it comes to these like literally life or death moments like battle or surgery in this first one. And then we talked about kind of like this notion of, again, like what we think about ourselves and what other people think about us. And where are the source of our questions and how can we find better answers, especially when it comes to, again, the life or death battle kind of thing of kind of what we how we balance our emotional state versus kind of like what we think about life. And then we talked about authority, where there's like governmental authority, kind of like gentry authority, and then there's the type of authority that's like a little bit that's more real and more visceral, which is kind of like the trust authority, where it's like, okay, no, this is an authority because I know that you're doing what's best for the group, and your commands aren't driven from what you need; they're what the group needs to continue to live on. So perfect. We hit an hour. Yeah, that's the stream. Have a good one. As always, this is on Discord. You can join the Bram Adams server from bramadams.dev or click the thing down below and try it yourself. Okay, have a good one.